The first clue wasn't a weapon, a carving, or some priceless treasure. It was a house. A quiet, turf-covered Viking house that had survived centuries of Arctic brutality without cracking, rotting or freezing its people out. And if you're watching this on the Forgotten War fronts, you're going to want to hit that subscribe button now, because what you're about to hear is the kind of historical secret that governments once locked behind cold steel filing cabinets. This isn't folklore. This is a real technique so effective it threatened entire industries and was quietly ordered out of public knowledge. Welcome to one of the North's greatest forgotten technologies. When archaeologists dug into ancient Viking settlements in Greenland and northern Iceland, they weren't expecting to stumble on a structural puzzle. These homes, planted right in the unforgiving Arctic, had no business being as warm, stable and durable as they were. They'd lived through storms that could rip roofs off modern cabins, through winters that swallowed entire communities, through centuries of wind so sharp it could peel bark from a tree. Yet the houses stood, and they weren't just standing. They were functioning in ways modern engineers couldn't explain. Inside, the air was steady. Temperatures were balanced. Moisture didn't collect and destroy the walls. Mold didn't creep in and ruin the structure. These long houses were, for lack of a better term, self-regulating. Then, in the early 1900s, Scandinavian engineers tried to copy the method for new Arctic towns. They failed. Homes built with modern logic couldn't match the performance of Viking designs made with roots, soil, and instinct. Something ancient was working far better than anything industrial. And that's when defense departments got involved. To understand the Viking secret, you have to understand the Arctic itself. It doesn't just freeze, it moves. Wind grinds snow into stone. Ground shifts as frost takes hold. Moisture tries to sneak into every crack and break a building from the inside out. Most settlers tried to fight these forces by sealing everything. The Vikings didn't. In one of the greatest strokes of environmental engineering ever seen from a pre-industrial society, they embraced balance instead of resistance. Their homes breathed. Warm air rising from the central hearth would drift upward through subtle channels built into the walls. Cold air, instead of invading violently through cracks, was pulled gently through small openings at the base of the turf exterior. This created a soft, constant convection loop. No drafts, no noise, no machinery, just nature doing the work. Archaeologists found those thin channels woven between turf layers and small gaps between stones that functioned like valves. When researchers rebuilt these designs in the modern era, the results were jaw-dropping. A well-built turf longhouse could hold an interior around 18 degrees Celsius, even when outside temperatures plunged far below freezing, all with a tiny amount of firewood. The Viking home wasn't fighting the cold. It was negotiating with it. By the 1930s and 40s, Arctic stations were critical for military strategy. Scandinavian engineers, they revisited the Viking method while building outposts, bunkers and research shelters. The old ways once again outperformed the new. A turf-based building stayed warm with almost no fuel. It stayed dry without mechanical ventilation. It resisted wind without constant repair. During wartime shortages, that kind of energy efficiency wasn't just convenient, it was powerful. That power drew attention. And like many ancient systems that worked a little too well, the Viking convection technique began to disappear from public discourse. Research papers moved into quiet civil defense archives. Officials pushed the narrative that such structures were unstable, outdated, or simply impractical. But that wasn't the truth. The truth was that a home requiring almost no oil or coal was a threat, not to the people, but to the industries built around heating them. So the old Arctic wisdom faded from mainstream building knowledge, surviving mostly in military files and isolated northern communities. At the core of the Viking method was the stone foundation. It wasn't just a base, it was a heat battery. Stones around a central hearth absorbed warmth during the day and released it slowly through the night, smoothing out temperature swings that would have killed later European shelters with moisture and rot. Above that lived the turf, not sloppy stacks of dirt, but handcrafted blocks cut from living ground with roots intact, arranged in alternating directions like a woven blanket. Each turf brick held pockets of air, tiny insulating chambers that gave the walls flexibility and thermal strength. Every few layers, the builders slipped in sheets of dried seaweed or straw, creating those hidden air channels that made the building breathe without ever feeling drafty. The roof completed the masterpiece. A low, heavy arc of bent wood or bone, swallowed under layers of moss and soil. Not steep, not fragile, just massive enough to press against Arctic winds and hold warmth in a slow-moving cycle. Visitors often described ancient longhouses as strangely quiet. No whistling, no echo, sound and temperature both cushioned by the building's natural weight. A Viking family could reduce the fire to glowing coals overnight, and the house held steady. Many settlers who came later burned 3 times the wood and still fought cold and damp. Today we talk endlessly about energy crises, sustainable building, and eco-friendly materials. Yet centuries ago, without blueprints or textbooks, the Vikings engineered a system modern experts took decades to rediscover, and then tucked it away behind classified covers. Their homes were not primitive. They were masterpieces of environmental harmony. Modern off-grid builders still borrow from these old ideas. Build partly into the earth to use the ground's natural temperature. Create thick, layered walls that trap air instead of relying on synthetic insulation. Add weight and mass to roofs so warmth moves slowly, not violently. Allow controlled airflow instead of smothering it. You don't need to mimic the design stone for stone to understand its brilliance. The Viking method is a reminder that nature, when worked with rather than against, can outperform even the most advanced modern systems. The Vikings didn't write manuals. They watched the land. They learned its rhythm. They built homes that didn't conquer the Arctic. They cooperated with it. And perhaps that's why this technique was so quietly shelved. It revealed a truth people in power sometimes don't want to face. Technology doesn't always beat tradition, and efficiency doesn't always come from machines. Sometimes the smartest solutions are the ones we walked away from. If this journey into forgotten northern engineering sparked something in you, share this episode with anyone who loves history or survival. And make sure you're subscribed to the Forgotten Warfronts, because the past is still talking. We're just finally learning to listen again.